And delving more into this, joining us from Washington is Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director. And welcome, sir, to In Focus.
Good to see you, Salma.
Thank you. It appears that the latest round of talks in Stockholm was promising, particularly as officials from both sides expressed optimism about a potential breakthrough. What ways were these negotiations, do you think, constructive, as described by the officials?
Oh, wow. Salma, the people I'm talking to are cautiously optimistic, but
I'm not, no.
yeah, the people I'm talking to are cautiously optimistic. I mean, there wasn't a hammer that was dropped today when they decided to break away from the conversations in Stockholm. But with the Secretary of Commerce leading this delegation, there's concern that I'm hearing coming out of Stockholm here in the United States that the U.S. is giving away too much, that the Trump administration is giving away too much, and that they're in a place of weakness right now in these negotiations. So China's got to be feeling pretty good about where this goes. The one positive I think that we are seeing is that there is constructive dialogue to get President Xi and Donald Trump together, and that's a big deal.
Well, the Stockholm meeting marked the third round of the U.S.-China trade talks in less than 3 months and ahead of the August 12th deadline. Does the increased frequency of meetings reflect, do you think, a strong desire from both sides to avoid further tariff escalation and to keep communication channels open? What do you think?
It depends. If I'm President Xi, I look at this as kind of being in the driver's seat on this. I think the pressure's on Donald Trump. Because of the intertwined economies that we have, because of the U.S. reliance on cheap products coming from Asia and in particular China, the Trump administration can't afford to see price increases. They can't afford politically to see inflation on manufactured goods. That being the case, this is a very sensitive time. I think they're wanting to show progress. I think the more that they talk, the more likely it is we'll see a continuation of a tariff truce that's been going on before August 15th. But make no mistake about it, is the people that are sweating right now are the Americans, not the Chinese.
A Chinese trade negotiator told reporters that both parties had agreed to maintain the truce. And adding that discussions in the Swedish capital were candid and aimed at sustaining close communication. But in your opinion, would a breakthrough in the pending deal represent maybe a win-win situation for both countries, considering their expressed willingness to continue negotiations, do you think?
Yes. I mean, look, I've stated on this network, and I think you and I, Selma, have talked about it before, is, the concept that our center has put out about mutually assured economic destruction. We are so reliant, each economy is so reliant on each other, that a deal has to come through in order to stave off a global economic reaction. The second you get the two biggest economies going after each other, that becomes a problem, and that creates an economic pressure on all economies. That being the case, I think the fact that they're still talking is positive. The fact that they are still putting out public statements that shows slightly optimistic progress is a good thing. I think what is going to happen here is the U.S. is going to have to realize that the recent trade deals between the UK and China, for let's say, I mean the UK and India rather. You look at the EU and China dialogues that happened with the EU president in Beijing last week. The BRICS alliance is a distinctive economic threat. The U.S. has got to realize it, and they're going to have to be very practical in the one-on-one bilateral negotiations with Beijing. That is something I think everybody's keeping an eye on, is the increased influence of the BRICS alliance versus the U.S. economic dominance.
Okay. Well, according to the Washington Post, the Trump administration has softened its stance towards Beijing. I don't know, based on recent talks. What specific actions do you think has the U.S. taken that suggest a more conciliatory approach?
Well, one of the big roadblock points in this dialogue was the sale of the NVIDIA chips to Chinese computer manufacturers such as Lenovo. Apparently, the Trump administration, according to reports I've seen, has kind of released a little bit of the restrictions on that, allowing Chinese computer manufacturers to, buy these chips and put them into their manufactured product and ship them out globally. That's a big concession for the U.S., I think. If the U.S. is trying to make itself the manufacturer of tech products again and telling all the manufacturers to leave China and return back to the U.S., don't offshore it, all you're doing by giving them access to the NVIDIA chips to put in their products in the Chinese manufacturing plants is allowing China to continue to build cheap electronics that they can distribute worldwide, and the U.S. and the global economy relies on cheap electronics from the Far East. That's a big concession. And I think it's, I don't know if it's a softening. I don't know if it's a calculated.
I was just going to tell you, is this like a softening position, do you think, in your opinion?
You know what, Selma? I'm still trying to read it out. The news that we're getting on the chips and the news that we're getting out of Stockholm is happening pretty rapid fire today. Okay. My initial take, my initial observation is that this is something that is showing that the Trump administration may have leaned over its ski tips. They may have overestimated the power that they have over China and the influence that they would have on China. I think they overestimated the strength of their economic dominance and their economic strength that they can do globally. And I think what's happened in the past 2 weeks has demonstrated. I think this is a nervous reaction. I don't think it was that calculated. But make no mistake about it, it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Because again, the Trump administration right now is looking. They just had numbers released not that long ago that said the U.S. Economy grew 3% last month, which is a very strong number for Trump and the U.S. economy. They're going to brag on that. But if you get into a trade war and you start getting into tariffs, you just saw that Modi got hit with 25% tariffs by Trump today. There's some serious dealings that are happening right now that could be effective that could have an effect on the global economy.
The Washington Post also notes that Trump's focus on achieving a trade deal could compromise U.S. national security and undermine efforts to counter China's expanding economic, military, and technological influence. What's your take on that, Mr. Russell?
Well, that's a very good question, and the thing about it is you've got to separate a little bit. I mean, yes, they're interconnected. When you talk about the economic and the national security interests, and even the relationship that we have with our alliance partners, it becomes very nuanced. What we're seeing on the economic side is the idea that if we're giving them these chips, if we're allowing them to use these chips into computers, particularly into larger scale mega computers, if you will, what we're doing is allowing them to kind of drive their influence into the world of AI. Does that become a national security issue? Of course it does.
Maybe. Yep.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely a threat. But for example, do we want to sacrifice a strong economic win for the Trump administration and maybe put some pressure on, like, let's say, Taiwan? You were mentioning the Washington Post report that said that the Taiwanese leader, President Lai, couldn't make a stopover in New York, that the Trump administration wouldn't approve that. That's a big concession to Beijing. So I does that create a showing of a weakness in the Asian Pacific Rim? Possibly. I think Xi's pressing the envelope to see how much he can push Trump and where that breaking point is Are we at a breaking point for Trump yet? No, but I think we're getting close.
Well, that brings me to my following question, where Trump has suggested he may meet with Xi Jinping before the end of the year. How might such a summit offer a political boost to ongoing negotiations and pave the way maybe for a more comprehensive agreement, do you think?
Yeah, yes. That's actually a very complicated question, Selma. The two leaders have to meet. The two leaders have to have a bilateral sit down talk. Just even for the the political theater, it shows that there is a lessening of tensions if the two of them are in the same room having a talk and talking one-on-one, leader to leader. The optimism in that, and the optimism in that isn't so much on the national defense side, where where China's beating us isn't on ships and troops and missiles and tanks. Where China's beating us is in our pocketbooks. They're beating us economically. The Belt and Road Initiative has pretty much given them a dominant presence in South America, Africa, areas that we used to have a good, strong economic presence that we're now probably in second place to China in those markets. By doing that, China is exuding a soft power that the U.S. used to do, but they seem to be beating us at that. And until we get some sort of resolution that, unless the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration start realizing that the existential threat from China isn't a fighting war, it's an economic war. They're going to have to change the focus. But that being said, anytime you can get Xi and Trump in the same room together is going to relieve the tensions on a strategic front from a possible shooting war. But most importantly, it's fixing the war of the economies. The economic war is the much more dangerous threat to the global the global security.
And that was Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your valuable insights and joining us today at In Focus.